For Pity's Sake Audio Productions presents The Swan Island Connection, a sea change mystery by Dorothy Johnston. Read by Jennifer Mcdonald.
The Swan Island Connection, a sea change mystery by Dorothy Johnston. Dedication. For my sister, Judy Johnston. With grateful thanks to those who have helped in the writing of this novel, my family, and the team at For Pity's Sake. While this novel is set in real places and references some actual events, all characters are entirely fictitious. Any resemblance to any person, whether living or dead, is entirely coincidental. Chapter 1. Queenscliff, 2009. All children were a mix of innocence and guile, Chris Blackie thought, but the innocence had been squashed out of Bobby McGilvrey unnaturally young. Chris Blackie, senior constable in charge of the small, some would say redundant, Queenscliff police station, was in the habit of qualifying his impressions and his thoughts. He did so automatically, and for the last 4 months he'd lived mostly in his own company, with only himself to talk to and share impressions with, apart from the small practicalities of daily life. He'd been travelling in countries where, though everyone who dealt with tourists had at least a smattering, English was not a language in which they chose to express themselves. Though politeness ran deep, he too often watched the pained expression with which some poor river guide attempted to follow what he was trying to convey. He was sensitive enough not to continue inflicting embarrassment, so he'd given up. He wished now that he'd kept a diary, but it was too late for that. Rivers of the world, he would have called his trip, and the irony would have been apparent to no one but himself. He'd become fascinated by the Nile, and though planning only to make a stopover in Egypt on his way to Europe, he'd ended up staying in Africa for almost the whole of his leave. Now Australian rivers looked like trickling drains, and Chris was back on the Barwon, a river he'd ignored for most of his life, trying to work out what to do about Bobby McGilvrey. There'd been a dolphin in the estuary for almost 2 months. It happened from time to time that dolphins, seals as well, came upriver to fish, but none in his memory had stayed so long. Familiarity had led to mischief. Some boys had stoned the dolphin, and then tried to run it down with the boat their ringleader, Stuart Hocking, had borrowed from his father. Dealing with the incident wasn't Chris's problem, thankfully, since Barwon Heads was in the next municipality. But Bobby and the gang lived in Queenscliff, and it was to Chris that Bobby had reported the attacks. In retaliation, the gang had threatened to kill him. This was not surprising. Bobby was a loner, who did not appear to be afraid of making enemies. He did what he pleased and took orders from no one, so far as Chris could tell. He looked young for a 10-year-old, skinny but strong in the arms and legs. He'd been paddling about on the bay and the river in his small red kayak since he was 6. He'd rigged up a trailer for the kayak out of a discarded pram and carted it about behind his bike the way other kids carted surfboards. Chris believed he'd stolen the money to buy the kayak. He could pass off the death threat as children's chatter, but something told him he had better not. Bobby McGilvrey was not a boy to give away information, and there were aspects of the business with the dolphin that he was keeping to himself. Chris identified with the child's reserve, but this identification resided in a part of himself that he did not wish to examine closely. Examining uncomfortable emotions had been a large part of the reason for his extended leave, and he was aware that he'd returned with only a small amount of introspection having been achieved. Bobby appeared without his bike or kayak, his dog Max walking close to heel. When Chris said hello, Bobby regarded him solemnly and did not return the greeting.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?